The blood-red sunset painted the distant mountains as Luke Ingram watched the flames of his campfire dance. He'd been riding for 3 days straight, his body aching from the saddle, his mind weary from the solitude. The year was 1872, and the West was still wild, untamed, and beautiful in its savagery. His weathered hands gripped the tin cup of coffee as he stared into the fire, memories of the war still haunting him even 7 years after its end. The nightmares had driven him west, far from his Tennessee home, searching for something he couldn't name. A sound in the darkness made him reach for his Colt. "Who's there?" he called, voice steady despite his racing heart. "Please," came a woman's voice, trembling with fear or cold or both. "We mean no harm." Luke squinted into the darkness, his hand still on his revolver. "Show yourself and keep your hands where I can see them." 3 figures emerged from the shadows, women, all of them looking trail-worn and desperate. The tallest one stepped forward, her chin raised despite her obvious exhaustion. "I'm Willa Patterson," she said. "These are my sisters, Abigail and Josephine. Our wagon broke an axle about 2 miles back. We've been walking since." Luke studied them carefully. Willa appeared to be in her mid-20s, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid. Her sisters looked younger, perhaps 19 and 20. All 3 were dressed in simple traveling clothes, now dusty from the trail. "You ladies are a long way from anywhere," Luke said, relaxing his grip on his weapon but not fully letting go. Trust came hard these days. "We're heading to Beaver, Colorado," Willa said. "Our uncle has a mercantile there. He's offered us positions after our parents." Her voice trailed off. Luke nodded, understanding the unspoken tragedy. Too many folks had lost family in recent years to the war, to disease, to the harsh realities of life. "I've got beans and coffee," he said finally, gesturing to the fire. "Not much, but you're welcome to share." Relief washed over Willa's face. "Thank you. We haven't eaten since morning." Luke busied himself preparing more food while the women settled around his fire. He had extra blankets in his pack, which he offered without comment. As they ate, the youngest sister Josephine began to tell a story about their journey from Philadelphia. Soon, Abigail joined in, and before long, both were laughing about an encounter with a particularly pompous stagecoach driver days earlier. Luke found himself watching them, particularly Willa. She laughed less than her sisters, but when she did, the sound was rich and genuine. It transformed her face, softening the worry lines around her eyes. Something stirred in his chest, an unfamiliar warmth he hadn't felt in years. "Beaver's still 2 days' ride," Luke said when there was a lull in the conversation. "I can help with your wagon tomorrow if you'd like." "We couldn't impose," Willa started, but Luke shook his head. "I'm heading that way myself," he lied. He had been aimless for months, with no particular destination in mind. But now, watching these women laugh around his fire, the West finally felt like home again. There was something about their presence that made the emptiness inside him recede, if only for a moment. Morning came with the first hint of spring in the air. Luke awoke before the women and had coffee brewing by the time they stirred. Willa was the first to rise, her hair loose around her shoulders before she quickly braided it back. "Thank you," she said quietly, accepting the tin cup he offered. "For everything. We were desperate last night." Luke nodded. "The trail's no place for women alone." Something flashed in her eyes, pride, maybe, or defiance. "We manage just fine, Mr. Ingram. Necessity teaches quick lessons." "Luke," he corrected. "And I meant no offense. The trail's hardly safe for anyone alone these days." They rode to the abandoned wagon after breakfast. Luke examined the broken axle with a practiced eye. "I can fix this, but we'll need supplies from town. There's a trading post about 4 miles east." "I'll go," Willa volunteered. My sisters can start unpacking the wagon. Luke frowned. It's not safe. I can shoot, Mr. Ingram. Luke, she interrupted, producing a small derringer from her pocket. And ride. I wasn't always a shop girl in Philadelphia. Something about her determination reminded Luke of his younger sister, Emma, who had died in the last year of the war. He nodded reluctantly. Take my horse. He's faster than yours, and this. He handed her his spare revolver, just in case. While Willa was gone, Luke helped her sisters salvage what they could from the wagon. Abigail, the middle sister at 20, was quiet but efficient. Josephine, the youngest at 19, talked constantly, filling the silence with stories of their life back east. Willa gave up everything for us, Josephine said as they worked. She was engaged to be married when our parents died. Her fiancé didn't want the burden of two sisters-in-law, so she broke it off. Joe, Abigail chided. That's Willa's business. Luke said nothing, but he found himself glancing eastward, wondering about the woman riding his horse. By midday, Willa returned with the supplies needed to repair the axle, along with fresh provisions. The man at the trading post said there's a storm coming, she reported. We should hurry. Luke worked through the afternoon, repairing the broken axle while the sisters repacked their belongings. The wind picked up as the sun began to set, bringing with it the smell of rain. We won't make it to shelter before dark, Luke said, wiping his brow. Best to camp here tonight and start fresh in the morning. They set up camp beneath a rocky overhang that offered some protection from the elements. Luke built a fire while the sisters prepared a meal from their new supplies. The first drops of rain began to fall as they finished eating, and soon the downpour was steady. Huddled under the overhang, Josephine began telling stories again, this time about their childhood in Kentucky before the war drove them east to relatives in Philadelphia. Abigail joined in, and soon both were laughing despite the storm. Willa sat slightly apart, her gaze on the rain beyond their shelter. Luke noticed her shiver and moved closer, offering his coat without a word. She accepted it with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. What brought you west, Luke? She asked softly while her sisters continued their reminiscing. Luke stared into the fire. The war, he said simply. Most folks understood without elaboration. Willa nodded. It changed everything, didn't it? Even for those of us who never saw battle. You lost someone, he guessed. My father and older brother at Shiloh, my mother to grief 2 years later. Her voice was matter of fact, but Luke heard the pain beneath the words. I'm sorry, he said, meaning it. I lost my sister, not to bullets, but to typhoid in '64. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the younger sister's laughter mixing with the sound of rain. There was something healing about it, the simple joy of human connection amid the wilderness. They're resilient, Luke observed. Willa's expression softened as she looked at her sisters. They have to be. The world isn't kind to women without protection. Is that why you're heading to Beaver? For protection? For opportunity, she corrected. Our uncle's business is growing, he needs help, and we need a fresh start. She paused. What about you? Where are you heading? Luke hesitated, then admitted the truth. Nowhere in particular, just riding, running from something or towards something. Her directness surprised him. Maybe both, he answered honestly. Haven't figured it out yet. The storm continued through the night. Luke took the first watch, then woke Willa for the second. When morning came, the world was washed clean, the air crisp and clear. They set out early, the wagon repaired and the sisters' spirits high despite the muddy trail. Luke rode alongside Willa, who handled the wagon with surprising skill. You've done this before, he observed. My father believed daughters should be as capable as sons, she explained. He taught us to ride, shoot, and drive a team before I was 12. Unusual man, Luke commented. Progressive, he called it. Practical, my mother said. A smile played at the corners of her mouth. They were both right, I suppose. The day passed without incident, the landscape gradually changing as they approached the foothills. By nightfall, they made camp beside a small stream. Again, Luke found himself watching as the sisters laughed around the fire, sharing stories and dreams. Willa caught him looking and raised an eyebrow. "Something amusing, Mr. Ingram. Just thinking it's been a long time since I've had company on the trail," he said. "It's nice." Her expression softened. "Yes, it is." The second day of travel brought them into more populated territory. They passed several homesteads and a small mining camp before stopping to rest the horses at midday. While the sisters prepared a simple meal, Luke scouted ahead, returning with news of a small settlement a few hours away. "We could push on and sleep in real beds tonight," he suggested. Josephine clapped her hands in delight. "A bath. Oh, please, Willa, can we?" Willa hesitated, counting the coins in her purse. "I'm not sure we can afford my treat," Luke said before he could think better of it. "Consider it payment for the company." Willa's pride warred visibly with practicality. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you. We accept, but I insist on repaying you when we reach Beaver." The settlement, little more than a cluster of buildings serving the nearby mining operations, boasted a small hotel with a dining room and bathhouse. The sisters' delight at these simple luxuries made Luke smile despite himself. After baths and a proper meal, they gathered in the hotel's small parlor. Abigail had discovered a battered piano in the corner and was playing a simple tune while Josephine sang along. Several miners and townspeople had drifted in, drawn by the music and the novelty of respectable women in their midst. Luke leaned against the wall, watching the impromptu gathering with a mixture of amusement and wariness. His hand never strayed far from his revolver, a habit born of experience. The West might be becoming civilized, but danger still lurked in the shadows. Willa appeared at his side, her hair still damp from her bath. "You're not enjoying the entertainment?" she asked. "Just keeping watch," he replied. "Some of these men haven't seen a woman in months." "We're quite safe," she assured him. "I counted 3 wedding rings and 2 men old enough to be my grandfather. The rest seem more interested in the whiskey than us." Luke chuckled. "You're observant. Necessary skill for a woman alone," she said, then added, "though I'm not alone anymore, am I? I have a fearsome protector." The teasing note in her voice made him smile. "Hardly fearsome, just cautious." "Tell me about Beaver," she said, changing the subject. "Have you been there before?" "Once, about a year ago," Luke admitted. "It's growing fast. The silver mines are bringing in folks from all over. Your uncle chose a good place for his business." "And is it civilized?" Luke understood the real question. "There's a school, a church, even a small lending library. Families, not just miners and drifters. It's becoming a proper town." Relief showed in her eyes. "Good, my sisters deserve stability." "And what do you deserve, Willa Patterson?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. She looked startled, then thoughtful. "I haven't considered that in a long time," she admitted. "Since our parents died, it's been about survival, about keeping my promises to them. And before that," a sad smile crossed her face, "before that I wanted what most women want, I suppose, a home, a family of my own." She straightened her shoulders. "But dreams change. We adapt." Before Luke could respond, a commotion erupted near the bar. 2 miners were squaring off, voices raised in anger. Luke immediately moved forward, positioning himself between the potential fight and the sisters. The hotel owner intervened before things escalated, sending both men outside to cool off. The incident, brief as it was, ended the evening's festivities. People drifted away, returning to their rooms or heading back to the mining camp. "Time for bed, I think," Willa said, gathering her sisters. We should get an early start tomorrow. Luke nodded. I'll check on the wagon and horses, make sure everything's secure for the night. Outside, the night air was cool and clear, stars spread across the sky in dizzying profusion. Luke completed his checks methodically, then paused, looking up at the hotel windows. Lamplight glowed in the sisters' room, he guessed. For the first time in years, he felt tethered to something, someone. The sensation was both comforting and terrifying. Morning brought clear skies and the promise of good travel. Luke estimated they would reach Beaver by nightfall if the weather held. The sisters were in high spirits, excited to reach their destination after weeks on the trail. As they traveled, Luke found himself increasingly drawn to Willa. She was unlike any woman he'd known, strong yet vulnerable, practical yet capable of joy. He caught himself watching her as she drove the wagon, her profile etched against the blue Colorado sky, and wondering what it would be like to stay in one place again, to build something permanent. Midway through the day, they stopped to water the horses at a small creek. While the sisters stretched their legs, Luke checked the wagon wheels and harnesses. Willa joined him, handing him a canteen of water. "You've been quiet today," she observed. Luke took a long drink before answering. "Just thinking." He hesitated, then decided on honesty. "What happens when we reach Beaver?" Something flickered in her eyes, disappointment perhaps. "You'll move on, I expect, keep riding to nowhere in particular." "And if I didn't?" The words surprised him as much as her. Willa studied him for a long moment. "That would depend on why you stayed, I suppose." Before he could respond, Josephine called out, pointing to the horizon. "Riders coming." Luke immediately tensed, scanning the distance. 3 horsemen were approaching fast, too fast for casual travelers. "Get in the wagon," he ordered. "Be ready to drive if I say so." He positioned himself between the approaching riders and the women, his hand on his revolver. As the men drew closer, he could see they were rough-looking, trail-dirty and hard-eyed. "Afternoon," the leader called, reining in his horse about 20 feet away. "Fine day for traveling." "It is," Luke agreed, keeping his voice neutral. "Something we can help you with." The man's eyes flickered to the wagon, where Willa sat with her sisters, the reins in her hands. "Just being neighborly. Road can be dangerous for folks traveling alone." "We're managing just fine," Luke said. "Appreciate your concern." The second rider, a wiry man with a scarred face, spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "You folks heading to Beaver?" "We are," Luke confirmed, every sense alert. "Shame about the trouble there," the leader said casually. "Marshall shot last week. Town's pretty much wide open now." Luke kept his expression neutral, though he knew it was a lie meant to unsettle them. "Is that so?" "Strange, since I spoke to Marshal Davis just yesterday on the trail." It was his own lie, smoothly delivered. A flash of uncertainty crossed the leader's face. The third rider, who hadn't spoken, shifted nervously in his saddle. "Must have been mistaken," the leader said after a pause. "Well, safe travels to you folks." He tipped his hat, a mockery of politeness, then wheeled his horse around. The 3 men rode off, but not before the wiry one gave the wagon a last, lingering look. Luke waited until they were out of sight before turning to Willa. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "After dark, most likely." Fear flashed in her eyes, but she nodded resolutely. "What do we do?" "We don't stop until we reach Beaver," Luke decided. "It's risky pushing the horses, but riskier to camp tonight." They traveled hard through the afternoon, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. Luke rode ahead periodically, scouting the trail and watching for signs of pursuit. By late afternoon, he estimated they were still a few hours from Beaver, and the light was beginning to fade. "We need to find defensible ground for the night," he told Willa. "I don't think we'll make town before dark." She nodded grimly. There's a ravine up ahead. My uncle mentioned it in his letters, Pine Creek, I think he called it. Steep walls on 3 sides. Good place to make a stand if we have to, Luke agreed. Let's push on. They reached Pine Creek as the sun dipped below the horizon. The ravine was, as Willa had described, a natural fortress with high rock walls on 3 sides and a clear spring bubbling through it. They positioned the wagon at the entrance, creating a makeshift barricade, and made camp in the protected area beyond. Luke helped Willa prepare the youngest sisters for what might come. Abigail took the news stoically, checking and loading the derringer Willa gave her. Josephine was frightened but determined not to show it. Get some rest, Luke told them after a cold supper. I'll take first watch, Willa shook her head. I'll stay up with you. 4 eyes are better than 2. They sat together near the wagon, watching the darkness beyond their small campfire. The night was quiet except for the soft murmur of the creek and the occasional call of a night bird. Tell me something true, Luke Ingram, Willa said softly, breaking the silence. Something you've never told anyone else. Luke was startled by the request. Why? She smiled faintly in the firelight. Because we might die tonight, and I'd like to know something real about the man I'm dying beside. Her bluntness made him chuckle despite the tension. Fair enough. He thought for a moment. I haven't been back to Tennessee since the war ended because I'm afraid of what I'll find. Or won't find. Willa nodded. Your family, my mother, my younger brother, our farm. I send letters, but... He shrugged. Mail's unreliable out here. I haven't heard back in over a year. Why not go and see for yourself? Luke stared into the fire. I'm not the same man who left. What if they're not the same either? What if they're gone? Sometimes not knowing seems easier. Willa's hand found his in the darkness. Uncertainty is its own kind of prison, Luke. The warmth of her touch sent a jolt through him. He looked up to find her watching him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. For a moment he thought she might say more, but a sound from the darkness snapped them both to alertness. Wake your sisters, Luke whispered. Keep them low and behind the rocks. Willa squeezed his hand once before moving silently to where her sisters slept. Luke drew his revolver and edged toward the wagon, straining to see in the moonlight. The sound came again, a horse's soft whicker, quickly hushed. They're here, he breathed as Willa returned to his side, her own gun in hand. How many? Can't tell. At least 2, maybe all 3. A voice called from the darkness. We know you're in there, folks. Just want to talk business. Luke remained silent, watching the shadows. Beside him, Willa was steady, her breathing calm and measured. No need for trouble, the voice continued. Just send out the women and the valuables and you can ride on come morning. And if we decline, Luke called back, trying to pinpoint the speaker's location. A harsh laugh answered him. Then things get unpleasant for everyone. A shot rang out, striking the wagon wheel near Luke's position. He ducked lower, pulling Willa down with him. Stay here, he whispered. I'm going to circle around behind them. That's suicide, she hissed. You don't know how many there are or where exactly they're positioned. Got a better idea? Willa's expression was determined in the faint light. Yes, we wait. For what? Help. She gestured toward the eastern sky where the faintest lightning indicated approaching dawn. My uncle expected us yesterday. When we didn't arrive, he would have sent someone looking. Luke frowned. That's a big assumption. It's not an assumption. I know my uncle. Her confidence was unshakable. We just need to hold them off until daylight. Another shot struck the wagon, splintering wood. Luke returned fire, aiming at the muzzle flash. A yelp of pain told him he'd hit something, if not someone. For the next hour, they engaged in a tense standoff, occasional shots exchanged, but neither side gaining advantage. Dawn was definitely approaching now, the sky gradually lightening to gray. Your plan better work, Luke muttered as he reloaded his revolver. I'm down to my last few bullets. Willa's face was grim but resolute. It will. As if summoned by her faith, the sound of approaching horses came from the trail behind them, not from the direction of their attackers, but from the east. Many horses, moving fast. That'll be the search party, Willa said, relief evident in her voice. The outlaws heard it too. There was a hurried consultation from their position, then the sound of horses being mounted. Luke risked a look over the wagon in time to see three shapes retreating into the pre-dawn shadows. "They're running," he reported. Minutes later, a group of 6 riders appeared on the trail, men from Beaver, led by a burly figure Luke assumed must be Willa's uncle. The sisters rushed forward with cries of relief, while Luke hung back, suddenly uncertain of his place in this reunion. Willa's uncle, Samuel Patterson, was indeed a bear of a man with a booming voice and fierce embrace for each of his nieces. Once assured of their safety, he turned his attention to Luke. "So you're the guardian angel who brought my girls safely to me," he said, extending a hand. "Samuel Patterson." "I'm in your debt, sir." Luke shook the offered hand. "Luke Ingram, just doing what anyone would." Samuel's laugh was as big as the rest of him. "That's where you're wrong, young man. Most would have kept riding. Come, let's get you all to town before those scoundrels think to return with reinforcements." The ride to Beaver took less than 2 hours in the growing daylight. Luke found himself riding alongside Samuel while the sisters traveled in the wagon with 2 of the townsmen as guards. "Willa tells me you've been riding aimless," Samuel said without preamble. "Any particular skills besides shooting and rescuing damsels?" Luke was taken aback by the directness. "I worked our family farm before the war, did some carpentry, can handle most animals." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "Beaver's growing fast, building happening everywhere. Man with your skills could find steady work if he were inclined to stay." "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Patterson?" "Considering it," Samuel admitted. "My mercantile's expanding. Need someone I can trust to handle deliveries, help with construction of the new storeroom." He glanced sideways at Luke. "And if I'm not mistaken, there might be another reason you'd consider staying." Luke followed his gaze to where Willa rode in the wagon ahead, her back straight, her braid gleaming copper in the morning sun. "I don't know what you mean," Luke said, but the denial sounded hollow even to his own ears. Samuel's chuckle was knowing. "Of course not." He grew serious. "My nieces have been through enough hardship. Willa especially has carried more than her share of burden. Whatever your intentions, be sure of them." They crested a hill, and Beaver lay before them, a bustling town nestled in a valley, with the snow-capped Rocky Mountains as backdrop. Smoke rose from chimneys, and even from a distance, Luke could see people moving through the streets, going about their morning business. "Welcome to your new home, girls," Samuel called to his nieces. "Population 400 and growing every day." As they rode into town, Luke observed everything with a critical eye. Beaver was indeed thriving, a proper main street lined with businesses, side streets with neat houses, a white-steepled church and a schoolhouse. It was more settled, more civilized than he'd expected. Samuel's mercantile dominated one corner of the main street, a large 2-story building with Patterson General Store painted across the front. Adjacent to it was a smaller building under construction. "That'll be the new hardware section," Samuel explained, following Luke's gaze. "And above it, an apartment for the girls. They're staying with me and my wife until it's finished." They dismounted in front of the store, where a plump, pleasant-faced woman rushed out to embrace the sisters. "Martha, my wife," Samuel explained unnecessarily. "She's been beside herself with worry." As the reunion continued on the boardwalk, Luke found himself hanging back again, suddenly aware that his role in the sisters' journey was ending. He delivered them safely to their destination. There was no reason to linger. He was securing his saddlebags, preparing to depart when Willa approached. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. Luke nodded, not quite meeting her eyes. "Your uncle offered me work, but the open trail calls," she finished for him. The freedom of having nowhere to be and no one to answer to. Put like that, it sounded empty even to his ears. Something like that. Willa was silent for a moment. "Will you at least stay for a proper meal? Martha's an excellent cook, and you've earned that much at least." Luke hesitated, then nodded. "I suppose I could stay that long." One meal became dinner, which became an invitation to stay the night in the Pattersons' guest room. The next morning, Samuel renewed his job offer, and Luke found himself unable to refuse. "Just temporarily," he insisted. "Until you find someone permanent." Samuel merely nodded, a knowing gleam in his eye. The days stretched into weeks as Luke settled into life in Beaver. He helped with the construction of the new building, made deliveries to outlying homesteads and mining camps, and gradually became known around town. People nodded to him on the street. The marshal consulted him about suspicious characters passing through. Children no longer fell silent when he walked by. Most evenings found him at the Pattersons' dinner table, where conversation flowed easily and laughter was frequent. Josephine had secured a position teaching music at the school, while Abigail helped Martha with the household and the store's bookkeeping. Willa worked alongside her uncle, learning the business from the ground up. Luke found himself watching her whenever they were in the same room, the confident way she handled customers, the kindness she showed to children and the elderly, the intelligence in her eyes when she discussed business with her uncle. She fascinated him in a way no woman ever had. One evening in late May, as spring gave way to summer, Luke was working alone on the new building, determined to finish the flooring before dark. Willa appeared in the doorway, a basket in her hands. "You missed dinner," she said, stepping inside. "Martha sent food." Luke straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Lost track of time. The apartment needs to be ready before the rainy season." Willa set the basket on a sawhorse. "It's coming along beautifully." She ran a hand over a newly installed window frame. "You do good work, Luke Ingram." "Your uncle's paying for quality," he said with a shrug. "It's more than that." She turned to face him. "You care about doing things right. It's in your nature." Luke felt uncomfortable under her scrutiny. "Just doing my job." Willa stepped closer. "Is that all this is to you, a job?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning. Luke knew she wasn't talking about the carpentry. "Willa, he began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. "It's been 2 months," she said quietly. "The temporary job has stretched on. You've put down roots whether you intended to or not. People here respect you, care about you." She paused. "I care about you." The admission, simply stated, struck Luke like a physical blow. "You shouldn't," he said, his voice rough. "I'm not steady, not the kind of man you need." "Shouldn't I be the judge of what I need?" Her eyes challenged him. "You've been running for 7 years, Luke. Maybe it's time to stop." Before he could respond, she turned and walked to the door. "Eat while it's still warm," she said over her shoulder. Martha made apple pie for dessert. Then she was gone, leaving Luke with cooling food and tumultuous thoughts. That night, Luke lay awake in his small room above the livery stable, replaying Willa's words. She was right, he had been running, not just across the physical landscape, but from commitment, from the possibility of loss, from living fully. The next morning, he made his decision. After completing his deliveries, he rode to the telegraph office and sent a message to his last known family address in Tennessee. It was time to face the past before he could embrace any future. The reply came a week later. His mother and brother were alive. The farm recovered from the war's devastation. They had received some of his letters and had written back, but the correspondence had apparently been lost. They urged him to visit. Luke sought out Willa that evening, finding her in the nearly completed apartment arranging furniture that had just been delivered. "I need to go to Tennessee," he said without preamble, Willa's hand stilled on the chair she was positioning. "I see." "Not permanently," he hastened to add. "To see my family, to settle things." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You're facing your uncertainty," Luke nodded. "I'll be gone a month, maybe two. I've spoken to your uncle. He's holding my position." "Will you come back?" The directness of her question matched the steadiness of her gaze. "Yes," Luke said, and for the first time in years he made a promise he intended to keep. "I'll come back." Willa crossed the room to stand before him. "Then I'll be here when you do." Impulsively, Luke took her hand and raised it to his lips. The gesture was old-fashioned, perhaps, but it felt right. Willa's breath caught, and for a moment, they stood connected by that simple touch, the promise of something more hanging between them. The journey east was long but clarifying. Luke found his family's farm thriving under his brother's management. His mother had aged, but was still the strong woman he remembered. The reunion was tearful, joyous, and healing. For 6 weeks, he stayed, helping with the harvest and repairing old buildings. He told them about Beaver, about the Pattersons, and hesitantly at first, then with growing certainty about Willa. "You love her," his mother said one evening as they sat on the porch. Luke didn't deny it. "I think I do." "Then what are you doing here?" she asked practically. "Go home to her." Home. The word resonated in his chest. Beaver had become home without him realizing it, or perhaps not Beaver itself, but the people there. One person in particular. The return journey seemed twice as long as the outbound one, his impatience growing with each passing mile. It was early September when he finally rode into Beaver, the mountains behind the town already dusted with the first snow of the season. He went directly to the mercantile, his heart pounding as he pushed through the door. Samuel looked up from behind the counter, his face breaking into a broad smile. "About time you showed up," he boomed. "Was beginning to think Tennessee had reclaimed you for good." "Where is she?" Luke asked, too anxious for pleasantries. Samuel jerked his head toward the back door. "Garden behind the new building. Josephine had the fool idea to plant flowers before winter sets in." Luke found them there, Josephine kneeling in dirt, planting bulbs, and Willa standing nearby, holding a watering can. She looked up as his shadow fell across the garden, her expression changing from surprise to joy. "You came back," she said, setting down the watering can. "I promised I would." Luke was suddenly acutely aware of Josephine's presence and his own trail-worn appearance. Josephine, displaying unexpected tact, scrambled to her feet. "I just remembered something I absolutely must tell Abigail," she announced to no one in particular, then hurried inside, leaving them alone. "How was your family?" Willa asked, moving closer. "Well, happy." Luke took a deep breath. "They want to meet you, someday." Willa's eyes widened slightly. "You told them about me?" "I did." Luke took her hands in his. "Willa, I've been running since the war ended. From memories, from pain, from the possibility of more loss. But when I saw you and your sisters laughing around my fire that night, something changed. For the first time in years, I felt like I had found something worth staying for." Willa's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "And now I'm done running." Luke's voice was firm with conviction. "I want to build something here, with you if you'll have me." "Are you proposing, Luke Ingram?" A smile played at the corners of her mouth. Inelegantly, but yes. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. "I had this made in Memphis on my way back." Opening it, he revealed a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "It's not fancy, it's perfect," Willa interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. And yes, my answer is yes. Luke slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her close, kissing her for the first time. It felt like coming home after a long journey, familiar and new all at once. That evening, they announced their engagement to the Patterson family. Samuel roared his approval, Martha cried happy tears, and the sisters embraced them both with genuine joy. As they all gathered around the dinner table, laughter and conversation flowing freely, Luke caught Willa's eye across the table and felt a sense of peace he hadn't known since before the war. The wedding took place in late October, as the aspen trees turned gold against the mountains. The entire town seemed to attend, filling the small church and spilling out onto the street. Willa wore a gown of cream-colored satin that Martha and her sisters had worked on in secret, and Luke stood at the altar in a new suit, his heart full to bursting as she walked toward him on Samuel's arm. "I thought I'd lost everything in the war," he said later that night as they stood on the porch of the apartment that was now their home. "My faith, my purpose, my ability to love." Willa leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "And now?" Luke looked out at the town, at the mountains beyond, at the stars overhead. "Now I have everything I never knew I wanted." He turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "You gave me back the world, Willa Patterson Ingram." "We gave it back to each other," she corrected softly, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Winter came early that year, blanketing Beaver in snow by mid-November. The apartment above the hardware store was snug and warm, with a pot-bellied stove that kept the chill at bay. Luke continued working for Samuel, but he was also building a reputation as a skilled carpenter. Orders for furniture began coming in first from townspeople, then from surrounding communities. By spring, Luke had established his own workshop in a small building behind the mercantile. Willa continued working with her uncle, but she also kept the books for Luke's growing business. They were partners in every sense, supporting each other's dreams while building their shared life. One evening in early May, almost a year after Luke had first arrived in Beaver, they hosted a dinner for the Patterson family. The apartment was crowded but cozy, with everyone squeezed around the table Luke had crafted himself. After dessert, Luke tapped his glass for attention. "Willa and I have an announcement," he said, taking his wife's hand. "Come November, there will be another Ingram in Beaver." The news was met with delighted exclamations and embraces. As the celebration continued around them, Luke pulled Willa onto the small porch that overlooked the back garden, now bursting with the spring flowers Josephine had planted. "Happy?" he asked, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. Willa's smile was luminous in the fading light. "Completely." Luke gazed out at the town that had become his home, then back at the woman who had made it possible. "I never knew it was possible to be this content," he admitted, "to feel so settled. Even though you're not riding free anymore," she teased gently. Luke laughed, pulling her close. "I've never been more free than I am right here with you." Inside, they could hear the sisters laughing, the sound drifting through the open door. Luke remembered that first night by his lonely campfire, how their laughter had awakened something long dormant inside him. "Listen," he said softly. "That sound, it's home." Willa nodded against his chest. "It always will be." The years passed, each one fuller than the last. Their son, Daniel, was born that November, a healthy, strong boy with his mother's auburn hair and his father's thoughtful eyes. 2 years later, twin girls joined the family: Emma, named for Luke's lost sister, and Clara, for Willa's mother. Luke's carpentry business thrived, eventually expanding into a proper furniture store on Main Street. Willa continued working with her uncle until Samuel suffered a stroke in 1878, after which she took over management of the mercantile. Under her guidance, It grew into one of the largest establishments in the county. Beaver grew alongside the Ingram family, transforming from a frontier settlement into a proper town with a railway station, a brick schoolhouse, and even a small college. Luke served 2 terms as mayor in the 1880s, helping to establish the town's first public library and fire department. In 1892, 20 years after Luke had first watched Willa and her sisters laugh around his campfire, they celebrated their anniversary with a large gathering at their home, a spacious house on a hill overlooking the town. Friends and family came from near and far, including Luke's mother and brother from Tennessee. That evening, as the celebration wound down, Luke found Willa sitting on the porch swing, watching their children and nieces and nephews playing in the yard. Daniel, now 20, was heading to Denver in the fall to study law. The twins, 18 and fiercely independent, were debating between college and travel. "Penny for your thoughts," Luke said, sitting beside her. Willa smiled, leaning against his shoulder. Gray threaded through her auburn hair now, and fine lines framed her eyes, but to Luke, she was more beautiful than ever. "I was just thinking about that night we met," she said. "How desperate we were, how uncertain of the future." Luke nodded, remembering. "You were the bravest woman I'd ever seen, standing there with your derringer, determined to protect your sisters. And you were the answer to prayers I hadn't even known how to form," Willa replied softly. "My night with a weathered saddle and a pot of beans." Luke laughed, taking her hand. Its familiar warmth still sent a thrill through him after all these years. "Who could have imagined all this?" he asked, gesturing to the life they had built. "I think perhaps I did," Willa admitted. "That very first night when I saw you watching us laugh around your fire. There was something in your eyes, a longing for connection, for home. I recognized it because I felt it too." Luke thought about the lonely man he had been, riding aimless through the West, haunted by war and loss. How far he had come from that solitary existence. "You saved me," he said simply. Willa shook her head. "We saved each other, and built this life together, step by step." From the yard came the sound of laughter, their children, their family, the legacy they had created together. Luke pulled Willa closer, grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought them here. "Listen," he whispered, echoing words spoken long ago. "That sound, it's still home." Willa turned her face up to his, her eyes reflecting the same love that had sustained them through 2 decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. "It always will be," she promised, sealing the words with a kiss as the laughter of their family rose around them like a blessing. In the distance, the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Beaver lay spread out below them, lights beginning to twinkle in windows as evening settled over the valley. The West that had once seemed so wild, so empty to Luke, was now filled with meaning and connection. He had found his place in the world not by continuing to ride, but by having the courage to stay. The cowboy who had once watched women laugh around his fire had found that the West could indeed feel like home again. Not just a place to pass through, but a place to belong, a place to love, a place to build a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. And in that knowledge, there was peace.